On a summer day in 1985, an entire family vanishes in Port St. Lucie, Florida. Later, a man is found with a gunshot wound to the head and a gruesome story to tell. My name is Sophia Talley, and this is True Crime in It. In 1985, the Brown family of Port St. Lucie, Florida was just your normal family. James Michael Brown and his wife Carolyn Denise Brown lived with their three adorable children, Shakita, who was 10, Barry, who was 6, and Brandon, who was 2. Shakita's biological mother was James' first wife, Gloria Lockett. As a father to Shakita, James felt lost, and he is quoted as saying, "It took two parents to raise a child," end quote. It also didn't help that he did not have a good relationship with Shakita's biological mother. And I just want to point out here, with this being the 80s, it's very rare, from what I understand, for a child to be living full-time with their father after divorce if the mother is able to care for the child, unless there's some extreme circumstances. Back then and even now, the courts are just biased in favor of the mother when it comes to placing children. So I just wonder why Gloria wasn't able to mother her child. I just wonder what was going on there. No judgment on her, because anything could have been happening. It just made me scratch my head a little bit and wonder why not too much information was given there. But in the end, it felt like James was parenting alone. The Brown family lived in a cozy 3-bedroom ranch that was new construction for the time, and they drove a new car, and they just seemed secure as a whole. Carolyn was a 3rd grade teacher at C.A. Moore Elementary School, and she was very active at the Goodwill Presbyterian Church, where she would often spend her afternoons there after school with her children. And she would stay at the church until late at night. And some witnesses say that it seemed as if she was stalling to go home, but no one seemed to know why. James was a brilliant teacher in his own right, and he actually went back to school to gain a higher degree. So at this time, he was in school himself in hopes of becoming a principal. He was looking forward to working in school administration, and he was just dedicated to his job. He often went to school early and left late, and though some speculated that he did this because he wasn't happy with his home life. But then this can also be read as being dedicated to your job. So just take that with a grain of salt. Despite dedicating his adult life to teaching, James actually was not returning to teach at the public school district in the fall. In 1984, so the previous year, Shakita's teachers and school administrators became worried when they noticed what looked to be bruises on her arms. They found that Shakita had red welts and cuts on her back as if she was being whipped. The bruises on her arms seemed to be the result of self-defense. So she was holding her arms up, trying to protect herself. It turns out that James kept a leather strap hanging on his bedroom door, and the night before, he brutally beat her with it. He was arrested immediately and charged with aggravated child abuse. He did not deny the charge, so he pled no contest, and he had to face 3 years probation and 250 hours of counseling with Parents Anonymous. His teaching license was also revoked for 3 years, and because he was on probation. And so if he wanted to teach again, he would have to retake the teaching exam. The worst part of it all was that James didn't feel sorry for abusing Chiquita so brutally. He felt like the state was overstepping their boundaries. He felt that he was justified, and he felt like he should have been in control in the way he chose to discipline his daughter. He is quoted as saying, "I don't know what to do next." James seemed more distraught over the fact that his dreams of being a principal were now over, more than the fact that he was having a disastrous impact on his daughter's life. Even though he could, in theory, get his job back as a teacher, and the school was going to take him back after the probation period ended, he would never be considered eligible for a job as a principal. Honestly, he shouldn't even be eligible to teach, let alone be a parent at this point, but I'm getting ahead of myself, and before I go on, I just want to break this down a little bit. So James is more upset about getting caught than the fact that he beat his daughter so bad that teachers in 1985 noticed. I'm going to be honest here. Up until recently, a lot of abuse was ignored in public schools, not because of malicious intent, but because it was often seen as a domestic issue that was meant for the parents to handle. So I just love this swift justice that he got immediately. So I also don't think that 3 years probation and 250 hours of counseling is enough. At the time, Chiquita was around 9 years old. So what is that, like third grade, fourth grade? A grown man could easily have killed her. So to me, this is a prison-worthy offense, and if this was today, his butt would have been sent to prison. Do not pass, do not collect 200. It's literally madness. That being said, I do respect the counseling from Parents Anonymous because I do not like the idea of separating children from their parents. Or for those of you who don't know, Parents Anonymous is a U.S. Department of Health and Human Services intervention program that strives to prevent child abuse by addressing issues with mental health, substance abuse, and just general parenting skills. But the problem here is that the child abuse was so severe that we have to ask ourselves if rehabilitation within the home is even safe or possible at this point. So in the July of 1985, James was still under probation. He was suspended from his job and he was struggling to find a new one. His last steady job was last summer in 1984 when he worked as a 4-H recruiter at the University of Florida. But it just wasn't a good fit for him as they needed someone charismatic and very type A, which just wasn't James' personality. And the University of Florida had no idea that he was convicted of child abuse charges. They knew of the incident, but they didn't understand the severity of it. Honestly, I don't think anyone in this circumstance understood the severity of the child abuse. Rosa Walker, Carolyn's mother, called her for her weekly phone call. Rosa lived 5 hours away in Tallahassee, Florida, and to close this gap, they talked on the phone weekly. And then suddenly in July of 1985, the calls just stopped coming. Rosa tried contacting her daughter and son-in-law, but she was unable to make contact with anyone in the family. So between the end of July and the beginning of August, Rosa called the police and reported the family missing. The police took action and decided to visit the family home in Port St. Lucie. The home was just eerie because it looked like the family just got up and walked out one evening. Dinner was left on the stove and the table was set with food left out untouched. All of the clothes were there, so it didn't look like they packed and went off somewhere on a trip. But two things stood out to the authorities. One was a freshly painted room, And another thing was that in the garage, an officer found Carolyn's ID and any other identifying papers she had in her purse at the time, shredded and thrown in a corner along with the purse. Despite this, police just wasn't fully concerned. There were no signs of a struggle, and everything in the home looked relatively normal. The police were perplexed, but at the time were not fully convinced that a crime had even occurred. I mean, as far as they knew, the family could have just been out for the night. By the time the next school year began, neither Carolyn or James showed up for work, and none of the children were back in school. Now, some of the news outlets from this time state that James was expected to be back teaching this year, but I'm not 100% sure of the validity of these claims since his license was revoked. And I'm just going to assume here that some details about his work situation may have just been lost in time. But when Carolyn and James or any of their 3 children did not show up for the 1985 school year, the family was then officially declared missing. Now, several things happen at this point, and the timeline gets a bit sketchy, but we do know that these things did happen around the time that the school year started. First thing we're going to mention is that James began to make weird phone calls. First, he called a friend who was an ex-coworker named Betty Brown, and when Betty asked him where he had been, he said he had to leave the country suddenly with his sons Barry and Brandon, and that he found a job overseas. And when Betty asked about Carolyn and Shakita, he did not have a solid answer. James even called Carolyn's sister and told her that she could have everything inside their house. And then when asked where the family was, James just said, out there. Which we don't even know what that even implies. Also, around this time, it's unclear whether this was during the initial search of the home or after things became more suspect. But one of the family's cars were found at a repair shop in Port St. Lucie, but their 1981 blue 4-door Buick Skylark couldn't be located. I'm guessing that they noticed that the car was missing upon the first search of their house, but because there were no signs of a crime, they probably just assumed that a member of the family was using the car elsewhere. But when they realized that they couldn't locate the car or any family members with the car, police began to fear the worst. And this fear was fueled even further upon a closer inspection of the freshly painted room in the Brown home. Remember, when they first entered the home, the police, they noticed that one of the rooms was freshly painted. And though this didn't seem odd at first, upon closer inspection, police realized that the fresh coat of paint was covering bloodstains. Police were now certain of foul play, but without locating the family's whereabouts, they just couldn't be certain. Meanwhile, in Savannah, Georgia, a hospital was treating a man who called himself Demetrius Jones for a gunshot wound to the head. Demetrius had an interesting story of being a victim of an armed robber, so now it's time for our intermission. I attempted to knit during this podcast, and I immediately went off the rails. Within the first seconds, I should say, it went off the rails immediately. So now I had to think back while I was recording this, which isn't fun, but you live and you learn. So on this intermission, I really don't have much to report other than my nitty news. Okay, I do actually. First of all, I learned how to crochet an African flower. I'm going to put a picture of it because I was asked to promote an African flower course, a free course done by Crafts on Air, and By the time you're watching this, the course would have ended. It was free, but I think at the end you can opt to buy some goodies, like patterns and things like that. But I learned how to crochet this African flower just because I'm so bad at crocheting. I've only crocheted like one thing as an adult, and it's unfinished. It's a blanket and it's unfinished. And I forgot how to crochet from the time, every time I pick it up, I have to relearn how to crochet. But what I liked about those videos was that it was a video. So I didn't have to Google, had a single crochet like I do every 5 years. Am I the only one that does that? I'm sure there's people like crocheters listening who have to Google how to do a knit stitch every time. I can't be the only one. So I learned how to crochet this week, and that was fun. And then what we're going to do with those little squares, or I guess they're hexagons and pentagons, we're going to turn them into stuffed animals. And I'm so excited to do that because I want to knit some and crochet. I keep saying knit. I want to crochet some things for Bubby. And so I'm super excited to figure out how to crochet stuffed animals. I've always wanted to try to do that. And doing it modularly and with videos seems like fun. Also, my test knit is coming to a close very soon. I can't remember what day I'm closing the test knit. I have it written down on my calendar, but I don't feel like pulling it out. So that's coming to a close, which means that the cardigan I've been working on needs to be finished. The rainbow gin does not have buttons just yet. And for those who don't know, I'm working on a rainbow gin, which is a top-down cardigan pattern that I hope to release at the end of this month. Think like Halloween time. And it doesn't have buttons yet because I procrastinate. I have not found buttons. I know what buttons will fit it because I tested out sizes, but I don't have buttons that I'm thinking about hitting up some sellers on Etsy who make them and hopefully maybe be able to get like an express shipping thing going on so that way I can get them here by the weekend. It is now Thursday. I am filming late this week, so everything is late. So yeah, so I hope to get buttons. I've been thinking about getting rainbow shaped buttons. They're probably not the most efficient at being a button, but they're cute. So if I could find that, that would be great. And so I wanted sheep buttons at one point, but then I realized that this cardigan that I knitted is only like 10% wool, so it just doesn't seem right to put a sheep on it. And then I was planning on making Christmas sweaters for everyone, but this sweater has been taking me so much longer to get off Slave Island than I anticipated that I'm not sure if I'll be able to make a sweater for everyone this Christmas. I'm trying. It's the end of October. Things are looking grim. I haven't started to test knit yet. It's not looking good, okay? It is not looking good. If I want this pattern out at the end of December, then I'm gonna need this thing tested like next month at the complete latest, if not next week. So we'll see if I can work some magic next week. I still have faith in myself somehow, some way. This is what happens, guys, when you are your own boss and you have ADHD. This is the problem. And I do have my planner. It's somewhere. It's hidden. But it's a planner, not a miracle worker. Amen to that. Oh, and then Bo is turning 2 in about a week and a half. And last year for his first birthday, I was able to knit him this beautiful hand knit sweater that's an unreleased pattern so far. And this year I was hoping to get his quarter zip knitted up, but I don't think that's gonna happen now because I got 13 days. I can probably knit it if all I did was eat, sleep, and knit that sweater, but I won't have a clean dish to even look at that whole week. And in case you're wondering, for his birthday, I got him Crocs because he loves putting shoes on. He's at that age where putting shoes on automatically correlates with we're going on an adventure. So whether that's outside in the backyard or getting the mail or even going to Target or something to get diapers and things for him, everything I do now is literally for him. He associates that with fun times. So we actually tried his Crocs on him because I know he's not going to remember it. Okay. And he did not want to take them off. He was wearing them for like 3 hours. It was a lot of Croc time in the house, and he he looked like he felt invincible. So that was pretty fun to see. And I just cannot believe, that's why I keep talking about the fact that he's turning 2. I just cannot believe that it's been this long since I gave birth to him. And now it's time to return to our story. Demetrius had an interesting story of being a victim of an armed robber. He was actually able to check himself into the hospital with, I repeat, a gunshot wound to the head, and it turned out to be 2 separate gunshot wounds. Police became suspicious about Demetrius' story from the get-go, and they actually arrested him for reporting a false robbery. And then after questioning, it was revealed that Demetrius was none other than the missing James Michael Brown. And the story that James had to tell was just horrible. At 7 a.m. on July 14th, James shot his wife Carolyn in the head while she slept in their bed with their 2-year-old son, Brandon. He then smothered Brandon with a pillow, left the bedroom, and locked the door behind him. Then James woke up his 2 other children, Barry and Chiquita, and took them on a drive that lasted for half of the day before dropping them off at a local park that was near their home so that he can clean up the crime scene at the family home. So that way he could clean up the crime scene at the house. He put the body of his 2-year-old son Brandon in the trunk of his car, picked up Chiquita and Barry from the park, then dropped them off at a store so that way they can buy candy. So he was just trying to distract them. So as they were buying candy, James pulled up behind the store where he disposed of his son's body. Later that day, once the family was home, James had an opportunity to move Carolyn's body to the bathroom. And then the next morning, while the children slept, he drove her to West Palm Beach, where he disposed of her near a car dealership in the area. The next day, on July 16th, James then took the 2 children to Jacksonville, Florida, and from there he called his friend Betty Brown once more, and he told Betty that she could have everything in his house. And after hanging up, James continued driving the children north. We don't know why or where he was going, but he drove continuously, only stopping that night to sleep. The next morning, between 3 and 4 a.m., James pulled over off of I-95 right outside of Brunswick, Georgia. He carried his children to a wooded area at the side of the road and shot both of them in the head, leaving their bodies there. For the next 2 days, James drove around Savannah in search of a place to end his life. On July 18th, James shot himself twice in the head, and witnesses found James while he was still alive. Concerned, they actually asked him if he was a victim of an armed robbery. And from there, he was treated at the hospital. So this part confuses me the most because I can't imagine how someone could be conscious at that point. But let's just continue with James' story. I just wanted to point that out just in case you're thinking exactly what I was thinking when I was researching this, was how is that even possible? So when they asked James why he committed these unspeakable acts of violence against his family, he said that he was worried that he had given the whole family syphilis. Now, that's not a valid answer at all, and not like there is a valid answer to that question, but they continue with the investigation and they go through the routine psych eval to determine to see if James is even fit to stand trial at this point. James was diagnosed with paranoia schizophrenia, and he claimed to have heard voices and visions. Despite this, they felt that James was able to stand trial, and so he was charged with the murder of Carolyn and Brandon's deaths. They did not have enough evidence to charge him with the murders of Chiquita and Barry, and it's unclear if they ever publicly revealed what evidence they had to convict James in the first place, and when there was bloodstains on the wall or DNA from the pillow. Again, this was 1985, so I can't quite remember exactly what they had at their disposal. That's a good question for crime scene nits, for sure. But all that I could find, though, was that police were not willing to give specifics on the evidence to the press. So they had evidence. I'm assuming it was any type of DNA matter they found in the house, but they weren't willing to reveal that. At the end of 1985, a jury acquitted James for the death of his wife and their youngest son, Brandon. But police still didn't have enough evidence to charge him with the death of Shakita and Barry. There wasn't even evidence that Shakita and Barry were even deceased. And they didn't really have much to work with. I'm surprised this even went to trial because I have yet to mention that there were no bodies found. So remember, James told police where he disposed of the bodies. But when police searched those areas, and they did an extensive search, they did not find anything. This leads some investigators to believe that James lied about where he placed the bodies. Some even believe that James murdered his family and disposed of their bodies somewhere closer to home in Florida. I believe this as well, but I'll get into that towards the end. James was committed to a psychiatric hospital in Florida, and about 10 years later, in 1996, he was moved into a halfway house. He graduated from the halfway house a year later in 1997, but freedom for James just did not last long. In 2005, he was arrested for threatening to kill a bank teller during a robbery. So yeah, he just never learned his lesson. And so that is the full story of the Brown family. But I just want to bring up the topic about how some investigators still believe that the bodies may have been disposed of close to home. And I managed to find the exact location where all of this happened. I'm not going to share any of that or where I found that or anything like that. But I found that, and I did a Google search, a Google Earth search, and then I found that there was just lots of bodies of water in that area. Because for those who don't know, I'm going to put a map up on the show, and I'm going to put a map up in the show notes. But there are a lot of bodies of water, lakes, reservoir, the oceans right there. I mean, there's just so many means to dispose of something or someone. Another thing I was wondering about is if they ever found the car. And I'm wondering that because recently in the news, I don't know if you guys spotted this, but there has been recent uncoverings of people who passed away in car accidents, whether it was accidental or not. And then because everyone has drones nowadays and we have satellite and things like that, people are like seeing shadows in their neighborhood lakes and bodies of water. And then the shadows will look like a car, and then they'll call the police, and the police will do an investigation. And it turns out sometimes it will be a car that's been there since the 50s or 80s. It's pretty scary how back then and that wasn't that long ago, they did not have the means to fully like rake the lake accurately back then, like how we do now. We have some like really intense diving technology. So it just makes me wonder if one day we may find them somewhere, just not where James claimed to have put them. And I think personally, this is my opinion, this is not backed by fact, but I think it could possibly be in a body of water really close to the house. And just around the house, there were just several large public lakes. So another thing that I want to talk about is how he was well enough to stand trial, but how he pretty much got out in 10 years, which I'm all for rehabilitation. But at the same time, there has to be a limit. There just has to be a limit for public safety, because about 20 years later, you would think, after being on medication and therapy, he may have been okay. But in 2005, he was arrested again for threatening to murder a bank teller in a holdup. He was holding the bank up. This isn't something that should be done by someone who was rehabilitated for over a decade, and they let him go. Why let him go if he's still having these ideologies, or if he's still able to do this? That bank teller. And something else that I was wondering, and I am not a psychiatrist, but I was wondering if because they believe he may have lied about where he put the bodies, and he most likely did, because they did an extensive search to find that family, and they did not find them anywhere. So if they believe that he lied about where he put them, and in turn constructed this huge story about how he traveled from Florida all the way to Georgia and did this huge road trip of destruction. If he was smart enough to do that, and then able enough to not provide them with the bodies, which would have definitely ended in a conviction, it makes me wonder how much of his diagnosis was true. And something else I forgot to mention is their ages here. So schizophrenia tends to become apparent in someone, they're born with it, but it tends to become apparent in someone when they are in their early 20s. This is why this happens a lot when people are in college. So at this time, he, I believe, is in his 30s. And so he's kind of past that point of when it will pop up. He was able to have a great job where he was respected in. He had good recommendation letters, and so everyone knew of him, and it just seems like people would have noticed if something was off. I'm thinking back to the case I did with, oh gosh, his name's escaping me, but it was my second episode I did with Christy Glass, and the suspect in the case also has untreated schizophrenia. I should say untreated because it is treatable, but in that case, everyone kind of knew there was something going on. They just didn't have evidence. While in James Brown's case, everyone seemed to just think he was just a nice, normal, professional man with a good job, and the kids liked him and respected him, and he was on his way to becoming a school principal. I mean, that's a feat for someone to assimilate that well, especially when you are suffering with a mental illness of any kind. That just sounds really difficult. So, and then on top of that, being able to get away with murder, I just found that really, it's hard. It's hard to do. And the bodies were never found. Hard evidence was never found. The jury didn't even convict him. It's just, to me, it feels like there is a case here that maybe he knew exactly what he was doing, or maybe not. I just wanted to voice what I'm sure some of you guys are thinking at home, because I'm thinking it too. At the time, they were children, but these people are still missing. There's still missing poster reports for Brandon, Barry, and Shakita, but I couldn't find any for Carolyn. And I wonder if that was because they know that she is deceased based on evidence that they have not publicly revealed to the media. So just keep that in mind. But I'm just going to read their descriptions. Barry Brown went missing on 8/16/1985. That's an approximation. He will be 42 years old today. He was 6 when he went missing. He's male. He's black with black hair and brown eyes. He was 3'6" at the time and 55 pounds. Brandon Brown would be 37 today. He went missing they said 1 year, but reports say 2. He may have been turning 2, but it says he went missing. He was 1 on this particular poster done by Florida Police Department, and he is a black male with brown hair and brown eyes. He was 2 feet when he went missing and weighed 35 pounds. And Shakita Brown would be 46 years old today. She went missing at 10. She's female. She's black as well, with black hair and brown eyes. She was 4'6" at the time of her disappearance, and she weighed 65 pounds. It's noted that she wore glasses, so if she was alive today, she would possibly still be wearing glasses. And so there is still hope out there. I wish I was more uplifted by that idea. There's a lot of people who are trying to think positively about that. But for me, I feel like at this time, we should keep our eyes open, but also keep your eyes open in the area of Florida for anything strange looking in a body of water, anything like that. Just keep your eyes open because it may be them. My name is Sophia Talley, and this was True Crime and Knit. For more information, including photos and sources, please visit www.thedrunknigger.com/truecrime.